Hi, welcome to Har Zion. We're here today on Asara B'Tevet, Tragedy and Triumph with Mizrahi TV. My name is Tzvi Sperber, I'm the co-founder of JRoots. Here on Har Zion is where it all basically started. Before 1948, there was no recollection of anything that really was connected to the Shoah. Even though in 1942, there was an idea that we should have some type of memorial, which came from Mishmar HaEmek. But in 1948, the man who really spearheaded this forward is connected to the Mizrahi movement. A man who was born in 1905 in Poland, a man who will go to Brussels to study in university, will come back to Warsaw, and will then head up many of the Mizrahi schools in Poland, known as the Avner schools. Finally making his way with his father to Eretz Yisrael, coming here, and he becomes the Director General of the Misrad HaDatot, the religious ministry in Israel. He, Shmuel Zangvel Kahana, known as Shazach, comes to Israel and wants to make sure that we remember so many of our important places. One of the things he does is to make sure that Kever David, which is behind us on Har Zion, has its prominent position within Jewish history. Another one is Rashbi, Kever Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. In Haifa, the Kever of Eliyahu Hanavi, and so many other places that he makes sure on the map of Judaism. And the Jewish people know where these places are. But there was one thing that was niggling at him. Because where we are now, opposite the place which deals with Chevlei Mashiach, that idea, if you want, of the concept of what David HaMelech will bring, Mashiach ben David, he wanted to remember all those people who he had left behind in Poland, Lithuania, and the rest of Europe, and all of the people from the Sephardi countries as well that unfortunately perished during the Holocaust, that there should be a permanent memorial for them. And therefore, 1 year before Kibbutz Lochamei HaGeta'ot will set up their museum, and 4 years before Yad Vashem will set up theirs, he comes and he makes a stand here on Har Zion by building this over here. This is Martef HaShoah, which is the chamber of the Holocaust, which is here that we're about to go into. And if you want, there is no more important place to come on Asara B'Tevet, because this place was set up in order that the community should remember. Where we stand now on Har Zion, on Mount Zion, around about 100 meters away from the walls of the old city. And of course, the 10th of Tevet deals with the walls of the old city, the siege that was put up by Nebuchadnezzar in 589 around the walls of the old city. We stand here now with the extra layer of what Asara B'Tevet is connected to. Because after 1948, the people who came here and arrived on these shores without their families, many of them who had been murdered, of course, in Europe, wanted to be able to have a day that was connected to the memorial of these people. Was connected, as you can see on the wall over here, to the memorial of all these communities. They wanted to have their own place to come, and if you want, cry, remember, say Kaddish here. Many of these communities came here and set up these different types of tombstones, as you can see from here. Part of my family comes from this place over here called Stashov. But we'll notice, as we look over here, you can see over here, Slavkov, there's another box on here. It's called Megillat Hashmada. In here, a sofer would write, and we have them in the storage today, names of people that they remembered were being murdered. Not all the communities could remember those names. Even though we have another day, which is called Yamasha Holocaust Day, that day was rejected by the Rabbanut, the chief rabbinate of Israel, and said, we have a day. We have a Yom Ta'anit, we have a fast day, that we can connect this concept of remembering all these people to. Let's take the 10th of Tevet. And so during Tevet, communities on the wall over here would come to this place over here and remember the people who they once lived with. One of those is the town of Volbum that you can see over here. In Volbum, around about 45 minutes from Krakow, most of the people were led together with their families to the death camp of Belzec. But in November of 1942, they were led into the forest. In the forest, 3 pits had been dug, and they were shot dead there. Do we have the names? Do we know exactly who was killed on those days? The answer is no. So Yom HaKaddish HaKlali, this day of a global remembrance of all of these people, a day of Amirat Kaddish, of saying Kaddish, is over all these people that came from these beautiful towns. The beautiful life that once was here, everywhere, all over Europe, all over North Africa, all over Middle East. Many people that were taken from various different places and unfortunately were murdered during those years. We want to tell you another story of another place. And you can see on the wall over here, there's another plaque up here of Vidova, which is connected to one of the things they have here inside the Martef, the chamber of the Holocaust. So let's come inside. The Germans entered into the town of Vidova and they searched for the rabbi, Rav Avraham Mordechai. They found his office, they went into his office and they saw that he had a little aron, a small ark in the corner there. They opened the ark, they pulled out something, which they didn't exactly know what it was, these soldiers that had walked into there, and it was the Sefer Torah. They asked him what it was, he told them it was a holy object. And as we know, and the Martef Shoah, the chamber of the Holocaust, has a number of different objects which are connected to the desecration of the Sefer Torah, whether it's lampshades that they were turned into, handbags, a tambourine, or you can see over here a jacket. They led him outside and they called the whole town together. They were all together in the marketplace in Vidova. When they told Rav Avraham Mordechai, "We want you now to burn the Sefer Torah." He refused point blank. He said the words, "La, la, no, no, b'shum panim v'ofen, no, I'm never going to do such a thing. Never." And so they took this rabbi holding the Sefer Torah and they poured gasoline over both of them. They burnt Rav Avraham Mordechai in the square of Vidova with the Sefer Torah. The idea of going after these objects we know from so many places, whether it be from Yugoslavia, where they were led to the train station, and the Rav of the town there was carrying the Sefer Torah as he was shot dead, one for him and one for the Sefer Torah. Or to the story of Kovno, where Rav Shapiro was the Dayan in Kovno at the time, the main judge of the High Court, the Jewish High Court there. A question came to Rav Shapiro, word he had already heard about. The Germans hunted down dogs and cats in Kovno. They brought them to the main shul, the main synagogue, took them into the main area there, the sanctuary, and shot them dead there. Blood everywhere. They ordered Jews into the synagogue, and they ordered them to open the ark and take out the Sefer Torah. There, they forced many Jews to tear the Sefer Torah up and cover the dogs and the cats and their blood with the Sefer Torah. Rav Shapiro was asked, what should we do now? Should we fast like when we drop a Sefer Torah on the floor? Or we see a desecrated Sefer Torah, what should we do? Rav Shapiro knew hunger was so severe in Kovno by this time that those people, anyone who had heard the story, or people that witnessed the story, if they would fast, maybe, unfortunately, they would lose their lives because they were so hungry. So he said those people who can should try and fast, just like the day that we're commemorating today. Those people who are unable to should give tzedakah, charity, in memory of the Sefer Torah that have been desecrated. We stand here and we understand the desecration that took place everywhere. This was not a fight just against the person. This was a fight against the spirit. This was a fight against everything that we hold dear to each other. We know people who sacrifice so much to be able to try and save Sefer Torah. A friend of mine told a story of his wife's uncle, of Beresh Reisman, who wrapped the Sefer Torah around him and in that way saved the Sefer Torah. Some of those Sefer Torah finally arrived to Israel after the war, but many of them were torn into pieces. They didn't know what to do with them. So they asked the chief rabbi of Israel at the time, Rabbi Herzog, what should we do with these? And at the entrance to Mount Shoah, there are two kvarim, two graves, which are open. He allowed them to be buried in those graves with open windows that you can still see in, as long as nobody could touch them. And here, on this mountain, with Rav Herzog, there was a ceremony of the burying of the Sifrei Torah. The chamber of the Holocaust also has many other artifacts. It has Siddurim here. One of the Siddurim here is called the Citadel Bell, which just has the Aleph Bet here. Don't know the complete source behind it, but what we do understand is that same idea that we know all the way back to the Bar Kokhba rebellion, where Jews who had hidden in the caves refused to give up the idea of teaching their children, and we have a cave where it says the Aleph Bet on the wall, which is still a classroom. The Aleph Bet may be taking us back to that famous story of the Baal Shem Tov, of people who couldn't, unfortunately, read Hebrew, but they knew how to say the Aleph Bet, and that too was good enough. But one of the most important things that people wanted to be able to smuggle into the camps, and when you ask so many survivors, what did you take into the camp? So many of them speak about the tefillin. But they arrived to places just like Auschwitz, and of course, as you know, everything was taken off them. Everything. There was a boy who arrived, his name was Label Sisman, and his brother Beresh, who was in another place camp with him before he left, he was 13 and a half years old, gave him his set of tefillin. Beresh was 15, Label was 13 and a half. He went on a train to Auschwitz, he got to the train in Auschwitz, and he arrived there. He was with a group of boys, and they thought they were on their way to the gas chambers, and he made them all sing, Ani Ma'amin, I believe with complete faith in the coming of the Mashiach. They weren't sent there, they were sent to the showers. Now Label knew, I have one important thing that I need to save. And at the beginning of the war, Label's father had traded in everything he had in order to get 2 pairs of leather boots, one for Beresh and one for Label. He had these leather boots and he hid the tefillin inside these boots. And as we know, everything was taken off the prisoners apart from their belt and their shoes. And we do know of prisoners in Auschwitz who walked around in shoes, not just in the wooden clogs that we know of. Label managed to get the boys that were with him to cause a ruckus and that people would have a fight. And the Germans would come and just try and stop the fight, and therefore they wouldn't check everybody. These tefillin stayed hidden in his boots. He got through the showers and the selection with these tefillin and into the barracks. And every day Label would give out the tefillin to people who needed them. One day Label was giving them out through the window of the barrack to somebody who needed this tefillin when the blockhead, the head of the block, saw him. Pulled him over, bent him over the hearth and beat him. But Label was happy because he was able to carry on that beauty, the beauty of the tefillin, holding on to something so dear that every bar mitzvah boy wants and that carried through all our life. Here you see some of those small tefillin, possibly the same size as those of Label. When he got to Mauthausen, unfortunately, everything was taken off him and he lost the tefillin. Shmuel Zalvel Kahana, the man who was the Director General of the Religious Affairs, the Ministry of Religious Affairs, wanted to be able to have a place, again, as we said before, that people could remember and be able to say Kaddish. Ashes from Europe were brought to this place over here and were buried here behind me. And this became the place where Rav Herzog again came to and said Kaddish here on Asara B'Tevet, on the 10th of Tevet today. The man who had led the Mizrahi movement in Poland in various different ways and then came here, instituted this idea of the fact that everybody should say Kaddish. Anyone who was able to say Kaddish, that meant that one of their parents unfortunately had passed away, including myself today, should be saying Kaddish on Yom HaKiddush HaKlali. He wanted to be able to make sure that Limud Torah, the learning of Torah, would take place here. And so above he instituted a kollel. Today the diaspora yeshiva sits up there. And to my right over here, he left a table with benches that people would sit down here, and after coming here to remember their community, would be, if you want, the Chevra Lomdei Mishnayot that there were so often in these communities. The society of learning Mishnayot in memory of these people. Remember, our duty today, as we stand in the Martef HaShoah, the chamber of the Holocaust, on this auspicious day, Asara B'Tevet, is for us to take the messages of these people, what they stood for, the spiritual resistance that they had, and take it and pass it on to the future generations. Just like we remember Yerushalayim, we remember Toshvei Yerushalayim of once, the residents of Yerushalayim of once. We remember the residents of all these little places that had this dream to be able to come to this place, Yerushalayim, not to arrive as ashes, but to arrive as people, to link us back to that idea that we spoke about outside, of David HaMelech, King David's tomb, and the Chevlei HaMashiach, the bringing of the Mashiach. Shmuel Zalman Kahana was one of the most important people when it came to the idea of putting people back into the old city. That idea, Uvnei Yerushalayim Kaddish B'Mehei Yameinu, that Yerushalayim should be rebuilt. We rebuild it, not just on the people that arrived to Yerushalayim in 1968, but it's on the shoulders of all these people who unfortunately perished too in the Shoah. Yehi Zechron Baruch, may their memory be blessed.